Ever feel like you're just drowning in information? Like every day there's some new buzzword, some new tech, and you're just supposed to get it? Well, yeah, you're definitely not alone. That's exactly why we do the deep dive. We try to cut through all that noise, pull out the key insights, and give you that aha moment. Today, we're diving into something really fundamental, potentially paradigm shifting: blockchain. You've definitely heard the buzz, but what if I told you it kind of flips the whole idea of trust completely on its head? It's not just another piece of tech. It's a different way of structuring how we manage information, how we manage value. And that lays the groundwork for security that doesn't need a central middleman. We're talking about shifting trust away from big institutions to lines of code, which is a pretty wild concept when you first think about it.
It really is.
Yeah.
And our mission today for this deep dive is basically to peel back those layers of blockchain. Let's get past the hype. We need to understand its core parts, what makes it tick, and the unique benefits it offers, because you really need that foundation before you can talk seriously about security. And for this discussion, we've been looking primarily at the Spot Technologies YouTube channel. They have a great video called Introduction to Blockchain Security. That's our main guide here.
Okay, great. So let's start with something familiar. How do things normally work? Like, think about your bank. When you put money in, take it out, check your balance, you're relying completely on that bank, right? They keep track of everything, they handle the transactions, and critically, they're the ones ensuring the ledger, their record book, is accurate. If there's a problem, like a dispute, they sort it out. Your credit card gets stolen, they can reverse the charges. But the key point, the really crucial thing here, is that this whole system works because you trust that central party. You trust them not to just randomly change your balance, which, let's be honest, is really just an entry or number in their database somewhere. You just have to believe they'll keep it right.
And that's precisely the point where blockchain offers this fundamental alternative. At its heart, blockchain is a decentralized, immutable digital ledger. That's the core concept. The key difference, like you said, is it gets rid of that central authority completely. So instead of one bank managing the books, the ledger is distributed. It's decentralized. Every node, every computer participant in the network keeps its own copy.
Okay, so how does that work without someone in charge? How do you trust it?
Well, it works through a really carefully designed set of rules. These rules are built into the protocols, the software, and they rely heavily on cryptographic algorithms, basically advanced math. These rules ensure everything is accurate and that everyone, plays fair. They have to follow the protocol. Now, this complexity, this reliance on code and math, means that blockchain security is absolutely paramount. It's critical. Because the ledger is designed to be immutable, that means transactions generally can't be reversed or changed once they're confirmed. So if something does go wrong, maybe a hack or someone loses their private key, it is incredibly difficult, like really, really hard, to the point of being pretty much impossible to undo the damage. The whole focus shifts. It's less about fixing problems after they happen and much more about preventing them from happening in the first place.
Right. So just stop and think about that for a second. The implication is huge. We're shifting trust from an institution like a bank with people and buildings to a system, to rules, to code. That's a massive mental leap. I mean, for a lot of people, trusting code might actually feel more daunting than trusting a regulated institution, wouldn't you say? What's the barrier there?
Oh, absolutely. It's a significant hurdle. And it really gets to the heart of where we as a society place our faith. Historically, we trust institutions because, they're tangible. They have rules, regulations, people you can theoretically hold accountable. With code, the trust isn't in people. It's in the mathematical guarantees. It's in the transparency of the network, how everyone can see what's happening. And it's in the collective agreement of all the participants. The hurdle isn't so much believing the code can work. It's more about believing the code will always work exactly as intended, and that the network as a whole will maintain its integrity over time. It requires a different kind of faith, I suppose, not in a person or an organization, but in the design of the system itself.
Okay, that makes sense. So with that foundation laid the shift towards system trust, let's actually look at the components. Let's break it down. How does this complex system actually work, piece by piece? The sources seem to group things into two main areas: data structures and infrastructure. Where do we start?
Let's start with the absolute fundamental unit of data on the blockchain: transactions. Anytime you want to record something on Ledger, you create a transaction. That's the basic action. The name obviously comes from the first blockchains, like Bitcoin, which were all about decentralized financial transfers. Sending money, receiving money, deposits, withdrawal.
Right, like a bank transaction.
Exactly. But it's evolved way beyond that now, especially with smart contract platforms like Ethereum. On those platforms, transactions aren't just about moving value around. They can actually contain executable code. This allows the nodes on the network to update something often called the state-of-the-world computer, which sounds grand, but it basically means a shared, decentralized environment where complex programs can run, not just simple value transfers.
Okay, so transactions can be more than just money moving. How do we know who's sending what and that they're allowed to?
Good question. That's handled by public key cryptography. It sounds complex, but the basic idea is you generate a random, secret private key. From that private key, math derives a public key, and from the public key, you get your account address, the thing you share with others. Your private key, which you keep secret, is what you use to create a digital signature. This signature proves you authorized a transaction from your account without revealing the key itself. And transactions can get pretty sophisticated too. They might involve multiple inputs, like funds coming from different sources, and multiple outputs going to various destinations, all in one go.
All right, so we have these individual transactions, records of activity, maybe value transfer, maybe running code, but they aren't just like thrown onto the ledger one by one, right? What happens next? How do they get organized?
Exactly. They get collected together into blocks. Think of blocks as containers or pages in the ledger. These blocks are the actual units that get added to the blockchain's ledger in sequence. They're created at pretty regular intervals, could be seconds, could be minutes, depends on the blockchain, by special nodes called block producers. These are the participants running the consensus algorithm, the process for agreeing on the state of the ledger.
Okay, containers. What's inside a block?
Each block basically has two parts. There's the block header and the block body. The header is like the summary page. It contains metadata, things like a timestamp showing when the block was created, something called the root hash of Merkle tree.
Whoa, Merkle tree. Sounds technical.
It is a bit, but the concept is important. Imagine it like a tamper-proof table of contents for all the transactions in the block. It uses hashing to create a single fingerprint that represents all the transactions. If even one transaction changes, the fingerprint changes. It's super efficient for verification. The header also includes something called a nonce that's often used in proof-of-work systems. It's like a puzzle piece sieve. Miners adjust to find a valid block hash. And then, crucially, the header contains the hash of the previous block's header. The block body is simpler. It's just the set of all the transactions included in that specific block.
Okay, wait. That last part, the hash of the previous block's header, this is where it gets really interesting, right? This is the chain part.
That's exactly it. That hash acts like a cryptographic link, chaining each new block securely to the one before it, all the way back to the very first block.
So it creates this unbroken sequence, and that link is based on the content of the previous block via its hash.
Precisely. And this isn't just for neatness. It's a core security feature. It provides that immutability we talked about. While creating one valid block is what block producers do normally, trying to create a fake history, like multiple fake blocks, to enable a double spend attack.
Where Alice tries to spend the same money twice, sending it to Bob and also to Charlie.
Exactly that. The system is designed to make creating such a fake chain incredibly difficult, computationally expensive. You'd have to recalculate the hash for the fake block, and for every single block that comes after it in the chain, faster than the rest of the network is building the legitimate chain. And remember that Merkle tree hash in the header. That ensures the immutability of the header extends down to every single transaction in the body. You can't tamper with a transaction in an old block without invalidating that block's header hash, which then breaks the entire chain from that point forward.
Wow. Okay, so the structure itself provides this really strong protection against tampering. It's baked right in.
Baked right in. It creates an incredibly high level of data integrity. Any change becomes immediately obvious.
That's clever. So we have transactions bundled into blocks, chained together securely, but who, or rather what, is actually doing all this work? Running the software, storing the data.
Right, the physical layer, so to speak. That's where nodes come into play. Simply put, a blockchain node is just a computer that's running the specific blockchain software. It's participating in the network. Nodes can have different roles, depending on the blockchain and how they're configured. Some might be involved in block production, like we mentioned, participating in the consensus process to select who gets to create the next block and agreeing on the ledger's current state. Others might primarily just store a full copy of the digital ledger, validating transactions and blocks as they come in. And this is decentralization in action again. Not every node has to do everything. You might have specialized producing nodes and many more non-producing nodes that just store and validate. This distribution of responsibilities is absolutely key because, remember, there's no central bank, no single authority overseeing everything. The network itself handles it.
Okay, so lots of computers, nodes, running the software, maybe doing different jobs. But how do they coordinate? How do they all talk to each other if there's no central server managing connections?
Great question. They connect and communicate through a peer-to-peer network, or P2P network. This goes back to the core principle of avoiding centralization and single points of failure. Think about traditional internet services, like, say, email with Gmail. If Google's servers go down, your email access might be disrupted. That's a single point of failure. Blockchain aims to avoid that. In a P2P network, each node connects directly to a handful of other nodes, called its peers. It's not like every node is connected to every other node that wouldn't scale, especially for massive networks like Bitcoin or Ethereum with thousands, maybe millions of participants.
Right, that would be chaos.
Exactly. So instead, if you want to broadcast something like a new transaction you just created, you send it only to your connected peers. Those peers then validate it and forward it to their peers, and so on. It ripples through the network. Data, whether it's transactions waiting to be confirmed or newly created blocks, propagates step by step, peer to peer. This creates redundancy. There are multiple paths for data to travel, which makes the network really resilient. If some nodes go offline, the data can still find its way around. And crucially, the information eventually reaches pretty much everyone without needing to go through any central coordinating server. It's decentralization at the network level.
Okay, that paints a much clearer picture of the how: transactions, blocks, nodes, P2P network. So bringing it all together, what are the big takeaways? What does this unique architecture actually deliver? What are the core benefits we get from this design?
Right, the so what question. This structure enables several powerful features. First, there's anonymity, although it's probably more accurate to call it pseudo-anonymity. Your blockchain account, your address, isn't directly linked to your real-world identity like a bank account often is. It's generated from that random private key, remember?
So nobody knows it's me initially.
Initially, yes, but it's not perfect anonymity. If you, say, give your address to someone so they can send you crypto, well, now they know that address is linked to you. Also, analysts can look at transaction patterns, what's called patterns of life. If an address consistently interacts with, say, your local coffee shop's known address, or online merchants you use, law enforcement or others might be able to eventually trace activity back to real individuals. So pseudo-anonymous is a better term.
Got it. Okay, what else?
Next, and we've hit this a few times, but it's crucial, decentralization. This is really the foundational benefit. No single central authority controls the network or the ledger. Trust is shifted away from one institution and placed onto the algorithms, the protocols, and the network of cooperating nodes.
Which leads to resilience, right?
Exactly. That's the next benefit. Fault tolerance. Think about centralized systems again. They have single points of failure. A data center could lose power, get hit by ransomware, or just have a major server meltdown.
Yeah, we've all seen website outages.
Right. Blockchain, by its distributed nature, is designed to be highly fault tolerant. No single node is essential for the network to operate. A whole bunch of nodes could go offline due to power cuts, internet issues, whatever, and the network as a whole should continue to function, processing transactions and adding blocks. It provides this inherent resilience against disruption.
Okay, decentralization, fault tolerance. What about the data itself?
That brings us back to the immutability of the digital ledger. As we discussed with the chaining of blocks and hashing, the design makes it incredibly difficult, bordering on impossible, for someone to go back and rewrite the history recorded on the blockchain.
And the benefit there is trust in the record.
Precisely. Even if some individual node operator wanted to cheat, maybe change a past transaction to give themselves more money, the system itself, the consensus rules, and the cryptography prevents them from doing so successfully without being detected and rejected by the rest of the network. This ensures that everyone can trust their copy of the ledger because the system enforces consistency across all valid copies.
And if everyone has a copy, does that mean everyone can see everything?
Largely, yes. That leads to transparency. In most public blockchains, every participating node generally has a copy of the entire ledger, and they validate every transaction in every block. This usually provides a very high level of insight into the transaction data. You can often see the source address, the destination address, the amount transferred, the timestamp, unless specific privacy technologies are layered on top. This transparency is also functional. It allows nodes to independently verify things, like checking if an account actually has sufficient funds before processing a transfer. The entire history, usually right back to the very first Genesis block, is publicly accessible and auditable by anyone who wants to run a node or use a block explorer tool.
Okay, that's a lot of powerful features stemming from the design.
And they all culminate in the final and perhaps most defining characteristic. It enables a trustless system. Now, trustless sounds a bit strange, maybe even negative, but what it means in this context is you don't need to place your trust in a specific intermediary, like a bank or a payment processor.
You don't need to trust them to be honest or competent.
Exactly. Instead of trusting an institution, you trust the system itself. The protocols, the cryptography, the consensus mechanism, these are designed to ensure the ledger remains correct and immutable, regardless of the intentions of any single participant. There are also built-in incentives. For most blockchains, it's designed to be more profitable for participants, like block producers or miners, to follow the rules and cooperate honestly than it is to try and cheat the system. So even if some nodes do try to act maliciously, the network can generally still function correctly and maintain integrity as long as a sufficient percentage of the participating nodes remain honest and follow the protocol. You're trusting the code and the game theory, not a specific entity.
Wow. That's quite a journey from a simple bank ledger. So if I'm getting this right, the trust isn't gone, it's just relocated. It's placed in the system's design, the math, the transparency, and the collective consensus, rather than in a single organization. Okay, so today we really did dive deep into blockchain. We looked at the fundamental shift away from centralized trust. We untacked the how, exploring transactions, blocks, nodes, and the peer-to-peer network that ties them together. And we laid out the what, those powerful resulting benefits: pseudo-anonymity, decentralization, fault tolerance, that critical immutability, transparency, and this idea of a trustless system.
Exactly. And that, I think, leaves us with a really fascinating question to ponder for you listening. If a system like this can maintain an immutable, transparent, and trustless record of value, what else could it be used for? Think about other kinds of vital information, other types of interactions in our lives. Could they be transformed by this kind of design? What might the implications be for industries completely outside of finance? Things like supply chains, managing personal data, voting systems, digital identity. How might understanding these core mechanics change your perspective on our increasingly digital world and the interactions within it? Something to think about.